again. The word went up into the roof beams of a drill hall and came back down thinner than it left, the way sound does in a building with a concrete floor and nothing soft in it anywhere. Somewhere out past the edge of the light a rifle came up, wood and steel and 8 pounds of it, moving through an arc that had a count under it, and the count was being kept by somebody who was not going to say it out loud. That was a Friday in July. Hold it there. It does not belong yet. 3 weeks earlier, the sky over a state veterans cemetery was the color of a nickel left out in the rain, and the grass had that hard summer shine on it that comes just before the heat breaks. And 41 people sat under a committal shelter in rows of white folding chairs while a man was brought up the walk toward them. The detail that came up the walk with him should have been 7. Chief Master Sergeant Hollis Brody, United States Air Force, retired, 79 years old, born the year the Air Force was born. There were 4. Katarina Vreeland saw the number before she saw anything else, because that is what 28 years does to a person. She was standing at the back of the shelter in a plain dark coat, 46 years old, with her hair down and no bag and nothing about her that gave a single thing away. And she counted the detail the way another woman might have counted the flowers. 4. 2 of them very young. A funeral honors detail is not a formation, and it is not a parade. It is a small, precise machine assembled to do one thing perfectly. Once, in front of people who will remember it for the rest of their lives. And there is no second take, and no rehearsal, and no forgiveness in the design of it at all. Captain Prosper Aiken, 31, stood at the head of the casket with his cover under his arm and the flag in front of him, and did the part of the job that officers do, which is to be the still point. He was good at it. That was not the problem. The problem came up on the left, at the shoulder movement, in the hands of Airman First Class Corbin Ludd, 20 years old, 11 days on the team. The rifle went over. There is no sound like it, and there is no way to describe it to somebody who has not stood under one of those shelters, because the shelter has a concrete pad, and the concrete pad has a roof over it, and the roof takes 8 pounds of walnut and steel hitting the ground and hands it back to everybody twice. It landed a metre from Cordelia Brody's chair. She was 76. She had buried her mother, her brother, 2 friends from the base, and now her husband. And she did not flinch, and that was somehow worse than if she had. Vreeland was 2 paces up the aisle before she had decided anything at all. Her body simply took her, the way a body does when it has done a thing 400 times and something goes wrong in front of it. And by the time her mind arrived, she was already moving, and there was a man in front of her. Staff Sergeant Emmerich Vale, 29, non-commissioned officer in charge of the detail, with his jaw set and his eyes somewhere in the middle distance, and a rifle on the ground behind him. That was his responsibility and nobody else's. "Ma'am, please step back. I cannot let a civilian near that." He was right. That is the part that would take her 3 days to stop arguing with. He was entirely, completely, procedurally right. And he said it quietly, and he said it well. And there is not one line in any regulation anywhere that would have let him do otherwise. She stepped back. Ludd picked the rifle up himself, which is correct, and his face, while he did it, was the worst thing under that roof. Then the fold. 13 folds. Every one of them a specific thing, done to a count, ending in a triangle with no red showing and no more than half an inch of white, and a corner tucked so hard it will hold for 40 years in a glass case. They lost one. The corner went soft, and a captain knelt in front of a 76-year-old woman and put a flag into her hands with a fold line running the wrong way across the top of it, and said the words, and they were the right words, and they were said beautifully. At the back of the shelter, Katarina Vreeland stood absolutely still while her hands finished the sequence at her sides, all 13 of them, in the air, where nobody was looking. The cars came out of the cemetery slowly, the way they always do, in a line that had nowhere to be. Cordelia Brody did not get into hers. She sat sideways in the open door of it, with her feet on the gravel and the flag across her knees, and she looked down at the wrong fold line the way you look at a bruise, without any particular expression, turning it slightly to see it better. Vreeland stopped about 6 feet away. She had been standing at the edge of that car park for 4 minutes, working out whether to do this, and she had come down on the wrong side of it twice, and she went anyway. "Ma'am, may I show you something?" The older woman looked up, not at her face. Something about the way people at funerals look at each other means they mostly do not, and Cordelia Brody's eyes went past her shoulder, out to the row of stones going up the hill in the flat gray light. "You were at the back," she said. "I was." "You knew him?" "He taught me." Cordelia held the flag out with both hands. There is a thing that happens to a triangle of nylon in that situation, which is that everybody handles it as though it were made of glass. And it is not made of glass. It is made to be handled, and it wants a firm hand, and it will not forgive a timid one. Vreeland took it and shook it out. It went from a triangle to 5 feet of open flag in about a second and a half, and if anybody had been watching, that was the moment. Right there, before her hands ever did anything clever. Nobody folds a flag out of its triangle like that, unless they have done it several hundred times and are entirely unafraid of it. Then she folded it. Lengthwise. Lengthwise again with the blue up. Then the triangle, corner to edge, 13 of them, her right thumb going in at the tuck every time with a small, hard motion that had no wasted travel in it whatsoever. 90 seconds. Maybe less. She held it out and the finished thing sat in her palm like a piece of stone. 17 inches on the base. No red anywhere. A 1/4 inch of white showing where the last fold came in, and not a fraction more. 2 things were wrong, Vreeland said. The corner was soft, and they lost a fold. That is why the line ran across the top. She put it into the older woman's hands. Everything else they did right. The timing on the volley, the transfer, the way that captain knelt. Nobody is going to tell them so. Cordelia Brody did not look at the flag. She looked at Vreeland's hands, which had gone still and were now doing nothing at all at her sides, and she looked at them for a long time. Hollis used to do that with his thumb, she said. The tuck. He said the tuck was the whole thing and everybody spends their time on the folds. He said that to me, too. For how long? 6 weeks. In 2003. He would not let me do anything else. The older woman made a small sound that was almost a laugh and was mostly not, and she put the flag on the seat beside her, and neither of them said anything for a while. And up on the hill, a groundskeeper started an engine, and then thought better of it and shut it off again. 40 feet away, at the tail of a gray van, Technical Sergeant Bram Oyalaran stood with a rifle case half in and half out of the cargo bay and did not move. He was 34. He had gone through the ceremonial guard course 6 years earlier and washed out of the drill team in week 4, which is not a shameful thing, and which had nevertheless sat in him like a stone ever since. And it meant that of the 11 people in that car park, he was the only one with any idea what he had just watched. He had seen the shakeout. That was all. Not the folds, not the thumb. The shakeout. The second and a half where a woman in a civilian coat took a folded flag out of a widow's hands and opened it with one motion without once looking at it. He put the case in. He closed the door. When he turned around, the rental car was already pulling out of the row. It went left at the cemetery gate. Oyalaran stood in the gravel with his hand still on the door handle and watched it go, because the interstate was right, and the airport was right, and left was 40 minutes of nothing but the state route and the town and the base. The Installation Honor Guard building was a supply annex until 2014 and has never entirely stopped being one. 2 rifle racks against the long wall, a practice casket on sawhorses with a gray blanket over it, a folding table with a coffee maker, a whiteboard, and on the whiteboard, in dry marker, 11 services for that week with dates and times and the names of the cemeteries. Underneath the 11 services, there were 4 names. Vreeland came through the door at 7:30 on the Wednesday morning in the same dark coat, with 2 paper cups of coffee she had bought at a filling station and had already worked out were a mistake before she was through the doorway. Vale was at the whiteboard with a marker in his hand, counting. "Morning," she said. "I was at Chief Brody's yesterday. I know it was a hard one. I have done some of this before, and if it would help, I could give you a hand with the fold." She had rehearsed it in the car, and it came out well. Vale turned around with the marker still up. He was not unkind. This is the thing that has to be understood about Emmerich Vale, and it is the reason this is not the story that people expect. He was 29 years old. He had been volunteered onto that team 14 months earlier by a supervisor who needed a body. He was carrying 11 services in 5 days with 4 people, and a woman in a coat had just offered to help him with the fold. "We are good, ma'am," he said. "Thank you. We do this every day." And he turned back to the board. That was all of it. That was the whole thing. Nobody raised a voice, and nobody put a hand on anybody. And if you had been standing in the room, you would not have thought that anything had happened at all. She left the coffee on the folding table. By 11, she was back in the corridor outside, sitting on a molded plastic chair with her notebook open. And by 2 in the afternoon, there was a group message going around a team of 4 with a name in it for her. It was not vicious. That was the point of it. They called her the Flag Lady. Somebody had seen her at the funeral. Somebody else had seen her in the car park with Mrs. Brody. Corbin Ludd, 20 years old, and 11 days on the team, and still not able to think about Tuesday without his stomach going, typed a sentence into the thread that afternoon that he would remember for a long time afterward. "She was at Chief Brody's. She keeps coming back." The reply was a shrug in written form, and the thread moved on to a question about a van. Vreeland sat in the corridor for 4 hours. She was not sulking, and she was not waiting. She was doing the thing she has done in every building she has ever walked into, which is to count what nobody else in the building is counting. And she wrote it all down in a notebook with a soft cover in handwriting that got smaller as the page went on. Practice repetitions run that week, 0. Practice repetitions run the previous week, 0. Time between a new member arriving and their first service. In Ludd's case, 4 days. Number of copies of the service's ceremonial guard standard held in that building, in any form, printed or electronic, that anybody on that team could produce if asked. None. She asked 3 people. Nobody was hiding it. Nobody had ever had one. Number of people on that team who had attended the course at the schoolhouse. 1, and he had done it 6 years ago. Number of continuity trainers assigned to the program. None since 2023. She wrote that last line and looked at it for a while, and then wrote the year again in the margin and underlined it, because 2023 was the year that Hollis Brody's health had taken the decision out of his hands. Here is something worth stopping on. In almost every building, there is somebody quietly counting the thing nobody else is counting. They are usually not the loudest person in the room, and they are very often not the most senior, and the count is going into a notebook or a spreadsheet or the back of their head, and it is almost always right. If you know somebody like that, go and ask them what their number is, subscribe to Honor Tales. At 4:30, the team came back in from a service in the next county, 4 of them, carrying gear, and walked past a woman on a plastic chair without any of them looking at her. The whiteboard still said 11. On Thursday morning, Emmerich Vale did what a drowning man does, which is to make the thing in front of him go away through the proper channel. He wrote it up. Master Sergeant Lucienne Fabre, 38, ran the installation honor guard program on top of 2 other jobs, and she had the note in her inbox at 0650, and it was 4 sentences long, and every one of them was correct. A member of the public had attended a service on Tuesday. She had approached the detail during the Manual of Arms. She had since attended the unit's facility on 2 consecutive days without official business, and had made offers of assistance regarding ceremonial procedure. Recommend she be asked not to return. Fabre read it twice. She had been asking for a continuity trainer since 2023. She had a folder of the requests, going up and coming back down, and she was not in any mood to defend a stranger she had never met against a staff sergeant she badly needed to keep functioning. She signed it. That is how these things actually happen. Not out of malice, out of a Thursday. Vreeland's visitor pass came up for renewal at the pass and identification office at 9:10, and it was not renewed, and there was a form with a reason box on it, and the reason box said, accurately, that she had no official business with the unit. The airman behind the glass was about 19 and apologetic about it. "Ma'am, are you affiliated with the Department of the Air Force?" There it was. You could put a coin on that moment. 1 word. And this whole story ends on a Thursday morning in a pass office, with a 19-year-old going very quiet and picking up a telephone. And by lunchtime, there would have been a master sergeant apologizing in a car park, and a staff sergeant standing at attention in an office, and nothing whatsoever would have changed by Monday. "I work for it," she said. "In what capacity, ma'am?" "Long enough that I should know better than to be standing here without a sponsor." The airman laughed because it was funny and stamped the form, and Katarina Vreeland walked out of a pass office into a car park with no way back onto that installation. She sat in the rental car for a long time. The reason she had not spent the word was not humility, and it was not some private test of her own virtue, and anybody who has ever held a senior enlisted position will recognize it immediately. The question she was trying to answer was whether that program could be fixed by anybody who was not a chief, because a chief can fix anything for about a fortnight. A chief walks in, and doors open, and a trainer appears, and a standard gets printed and laminated and hung on a wall, and everybody is extremely responsive right up until the chief gets on an airplane. And then the laminated thing stays on the wall, and the practice repetitions go back to 0, because the fix was a person, and the person has gone. She had watched that happen in 2 other units, and she had been the person both times. So she sat in a rental car outside a gate, on the wrong side of a fence, with 4 pages of notes about a building she could no longer enter, and a whiteboard she could no longer see. 11 services that week, 4 names. Somewhere behind that fence, a 20-year-old who had dropped a rifle in front of a widow on Tuesday had not touched one since, because there was nobody to run him, and nothing to run him against, and no hour in the day where it was possible. She turned the engine on. Then she turned it off again. Then she opened the notebook and started a fresh page and wrote, at the top of it, in capitals, the words, "Continuity Standard," and underneath that, she wrote the number 1. And then she sat there and could not think of the first line, because she had never once in 28 years had to write down the thing that Hollis Brody had simply been. The light went off the parking lot at about 4. She was still there. Bram Oyelleran could not put it down. He had tried. He had gone home on Tuesday night and told his wife about a woman who had refolded a flag in a car park, and she had said, that was nice, and it was nice, and that should have been the end of it, It was the shakeout. He kept coming back to the shakeout. On Thursday evening, he drove out to the house on the state route with a box of leave paperwork he did not need to deliver, and Cordelia Brody let him in and made him sit down, and after 20 minutes, he asked whether he could look at Hollis's things. The garage smelled of cut grass and cold concrete. There were 9 boxes. Most of it was what you would expect, and some of it was better than that. A course roster from 1969 with a young man's name. 11 lines down, 3 programs from Changes of Responsibility, a training bay schedule from 2005 with a coffee ring on it, a manual with a spine held together by tape. The photograph was in the 7th box. A drill team. 16 people on a parade ground in ceremonial dress with their rifles at the same angle, and the whole thing so exact that at first glance it looked printed rather than photographed. 2011. Under it, in 6-point type, a list of names running left to right, and at the right-hand end of the front rank, where the non-commissioned officer in charge of a drill team stands, 3 words. Master Sergeant K. Vreeland. Oyalaran read it again. Then he turned the photograph over, and on the back, in a dead man's handwriting, it said the same name and the year and one more word, which was hers. Then he sat down on the concrete floor of a garage with a photograph in his hand and did the arithmetic on 15 years and got to a number that has a very small number of people in it and had to put his hand flat on the floor. He telephoned her at 9 that night. He did not use a rank because he was not certain of one, and because there is a specific kind of terror in a technical sergeant's chest when he thinks he might be about to address somebody incorrectly. Ma'am, this is Technical Sergeant Oyalaran. I was on the detail Tuesday. I know who you are. There was a pause on the line that went on slightly too long. I have got a photograph in front of me, he said. 2011. Front rank, right-hand end. Yes. You are the drill team NCOIC. I was. He walked out into his own backyard because his wife was in the kitchen and he did not want to be overheard, and he stood on wet grass in the dark and asked the question he had been holding since about 7:30. Then why are you letting him do this to you? Because if I stop him with a rank, she said, nothing changes on Monday. Ma'am, he has had you barred from the building. Yes. There are 11 services this week. 10 now, she said. They did the one in the next county yesterday. He put his hand over his eyes. What do you want me to do? And she asked him for the hardest thing anybody is asked to do in this entire account, which was nothing. Keep it, she said. Do not tell him, and do not tell Faber. Not because I am hiding. Because the moment anybody in that building knows, they will start behaving like people who are being watched, and I will never find out what is actually broken. Bram Oyalaran stood in his own garden for a while after the line went dead. He was 34 years old. He had washed out of a drill team in week 4 in a rainstorm 6 years earlier and had thought about it roughly once a week ever since. And he had just been asked by the woman who used to run that team to sit on the only useful piece of information anybody had. There is a moment that arrives sometimes where you find out who somebody actually is, and you get to decide, on the spot, what that knowledge is for. Most people spend it immediately. It feels like generosity, and it is usually vanity. If you have ever been handed something like that and had to sit on it, you already know what it costs. Subscribe to Honor Tales. He said nothing on Friday morning. He has said since that it was the worst decision he has ever made, and that he would make it again. And both of those are true. And he does not enjoy either of them. The motel was off the state route between the town and the cemetery. 1 story, 11 rooms, a light over each door. There was a garment bag hanging on the back of hers. She had brought it from the other side of the country and had not opened it since it went on the hook on Monday evening, and inside it was service dress, and on the sleeves of the service dress were the chevrons of a Chief Master Sergeant of the United States Air Force. Katarina Vreeland, 46 years old, 28 years in, Wing Command Chief. She had enlisted at 18 in 1998 because her mother's insurance did not cover a second year of anything, and she had gone to the United States Air Force Honor Guard in 2003 because a recruiter at a base in the desert had watched her do a movement at a retreat ceremony and written a name on a card. 9 years there, 3 of them running the drill team. And in between, every working day of 9 years, funerals. The public thinks of that unit as the 16 people on the parade ground with the spinning rifles, because that is what gets filmed. The unit thinks of itself as the thing that buries people. Every day, in every weather, at a cemetery on the other side of a river from a capital, in blocks, one after another, after another. She stopped counting somewhere past 400. 400 is a lot of mornings. It is a lot of gravel walks and a lot of folding chairs and a lot of standing at the edge of a hole in the ground, in a wool coat in August, while a bugle plays 100 yards off. And it is a lot of hands, because at the end of every one of them, somebody puts a triangle of cloth into a pair of hands, and those are the hands you take home with you. She stopped because counting had started to feel like a claim, and there is no version of that number that a person can say out loud without it becoming about them. Here is what the job actually is underneath the uniform. A rifle at a graveside is not a prop. It weighs a little over 8 pounds, and it has a bolt and a barrel and a butt plate with a steel edge on it. And the movements it goes through are not decoration. They are a language that a family will read exactly once, in the worst hour of their lives, and remember forever. Which means the count matters. The surfaces matter. The place your palm meets the stock matters, because a palm that is a half-inch off will hold for 11 repetitions and go on the 12th, and the 12th is always the one with the family in front of it. There is a specific physics to it that nobody outside the trade knows. The rifle is not gripped. A gripped rifle is a dropped rifle, eventually, because a grip is muscle and muscle fatigues, and a boy who is frightened grips harder. It is carried, on bone and on the flat of the palm, and learning the difference between those two things takes most people about 4 months and cannot be done by being told. And Hollis Brody, in a training bay in 2003, at 56 years old with a bad knee and a voice like a gravel path, had made a 23-year-old airman do one movement for 6 weeks and would not tell her why. "Your hands are early," he had said, roughly once a day. "Everything else is fine. Your hands are early, and one day that is going to be the only thing in the room." She had hated him for a while. Everybody did. It passed. It passed the way it always passes, which is on a day when the thing he had been drilling into her suddenly did something for her that she had not asked it to do, and she went and stood outside a training bay for a minute afterward and did not tell him about it for 4 years. In November of 2009, it rained for 4 days. The service was for a 19-year-old. Vreeland was 29, 3 weeks into running the drill team, and she was on the fold, and the flag was wet through by the 4th fold because there is no shelter over a grave, and the rain had come in sideways off the river all morning. The corner got away from her. Half a second, maybe less. She caught it and finished, and the fold was good, and nobody in the world would have said a word about it. The mother saw. Vreeland has never told anybody what the woman's face did, and she is not going to, and she has carried that half second for 17 years the way other people carry a scar on a knuckle, mostly not thinking about it, and then suddenly and completely. That is the whole of it. That is why she went left at the cemetery gate instead of right. She set an alarm for 6 on the Friday morning. Then she looked at the garment bag on the back of the door for a while and did not open it, and turned off the light. Friday morning came up hot and white. At 8:10, Emmerich Vale stood at the whiteboard and counted names for the 3rd time and got 4 again. The way you check a pocket you already know is empty. 1000, Riverside Plot, a 91-year-old master sergeant who had come home in 1953 and had outlived everybody who could have told you anything about it. Lucienne Fabre came in with her coat still on. "I can call the family," she said. "They will understand. We push it to Tuesday, and I get you 7. "No, ma'am." Emmerich. "We do not push a family for our convenience." And that was true. It was true, and it was correct. And it was said by a decent man who had turned down 4 separate offers of help in 3 days. And it was the single worst decision anybody made that week. Fabre looked at him for a moment. She could have ordered it. She was 3 grades up, and it was her program, and she had the authority to move a service. And she did not, because she was on her 4th year of asking for a trainer, and had learned that you do not spend a staff sergeant's dignity on a Friday when he is the only thing keeping the thing standing. She went back to her office and wrote another request. It was the 9th. Corbin Ludd was in the back, putting on white gloves. 20 years old. He had not touched a rifle since Tuesday morning. Not once, in 3 days, because there was no trainer and no scheduled block and no hour anywhere in that week where a 20-year-old could stand in a supply annex and run a movement 200 times with somebody counting, which is the only thing in the world that would have helped him. He had asked. On Wednesday, he had asked Vale whether they could run through it, and Vale had said yes, absolutely, on Thursday. And then Thursday had happened. That is the entire mechanism of this story in 3 sentences, and it does not have a villain anywhere in it. The van went out at 9:15. Vreeland arrived at the cemetery at 10 to 10 and parked on the road outside the fence because she could not get onto the installation, but a state cemetery is a state cemetery, and anybody may stand at a public burial. There were 9 mourners. A 91-year-old man leaves 9. That is not a sad fact. It is an arithmetic one, and everybody who does this work knows it, and nobody says it out loud. She stood at the back on the grass with her hands in the pockets of her coat. She put them there deliberately. She has said since that this was the hardest physical act of the entire week, and it sounds absurd until you have watched somebody who has done a thing 400 times try not to do it, and then it does not sound absurd at all. Across the shelter, Vale was checking the alignment of his 4 people with his eyes. He looked up and saw her at the back. There was a second there, maybe 2, where the 2 of them looked at each other across 9 mourners and a casket, and every single thing about that week was in it. The coffee on the folding table, the note at 0650, the reason box on a form, a whiteboard that said 11. And Katerina Vreeland smiled at him. Not much. A small thing at the corner, gone almost as soon as it arrived, and there was nothing sharp in it anywhere. Because she had worked something out, sitting in a rental car on the wrong side of a fence for 6 hours on a Thursday afternoon, and it had taken her until about 3:30 to get there, and she had been extremely slow about it. Emmerich Vale was not the problem. Emmerich Vale was a 29-year-old holding a program together with 4 people, and no trainer, and no standard, and no funding for a course he had asked for in writing in February. And he had been doing it for 14 months, and he had not dropped a single service. And the thing she had spent 3 days being angry at was a man carrying something that had been handed to him broken. He did not understand the smile at all. He looked away from it. Then Captain Aiken stepped up, and the detail came to attention. and a 20-year-old who had not held a rifle in 3 days brought one up in front of 9 people. It went down at the shoulder movement, the same movement, the same hand. 8 pounds of walnut and steel off a boy's glove and onto a concrete pad under a roof, and the sound went out across a hillside with nothing on it to stop it, and came back off the stones. 9 mourners. Not one of them said anything. Ludd picked it up. His face had gone the color of the sky on Tuesday. They went on, because that is what you do. There is no procedure for stopping. Captain Aiken did not miss a beat, and the fold began, and the fold was fine, and for 9 minutes it looked as though the whole thing might get to the end. Then the firing party formed for the volley, and it went down again. Twice, in one service, in front of a family of 9, and the second one was worse than the first, because the second one is not an accident anymore. The second one is a diagnosis. Katarina Vreeland came up the aisle. There was no aisle, strictly. There were 4 rows of folding chairs on grass, and she came up the outside of them, unhurried, with her hands out of her pockets, and Emmerich Vale turned and saw her coming and stepped between her and his airman, exactly as he had done on Tuesday. "Ma'am, step back, please." Same words. Not the same voice. There was nothing left in it at all. And from the 3rd row, from a folding chair, a 76-year-old woman who had buried her husband on Tuesday and had come to every single service that detail had rendered since, because that was what she had decided to do with the week, said one sentence. She did not say a rank. She did not say a name. Emmerich. Let her have it. He knew her. Everybody on that team knew her by then. She had been at 4 of them in 5 days, and had brought a tin of something to the annex on Wednesday, and had learned all 4 of their first names. Vale stood there for about 2 seconds. Then he stepped aside, and Corbin Ludd, who did not understand anything that was happening, held out a rifle to a woman in a dark coat. She took it in her left hand at the balance point. That was the first thing. Not a movement, not a flourish, just the place her hand went, which was the exact inch of a rifle that a person's hand goes to when it has gone there several thousand times and does not consult anybody about it. Then she brought it up. There's a thing about the manual of arms that people who have not done it do not know, which is that the movements are not fast. They are not supposed to be fast. They are supposed to be identical, and the whole art of it is in the count, and the stillness at the ends of the count, and the hands are supposed to arrive at exactly the same instant every single time, forever. Her hands were not early. 6 weeks in a training bay in 2003, and a man of 56 saying the same 4 words to her every day until she wanted to put her fist through a wall. And 23 years later, on a hillside, in a coat, with a dead man 11 feet away in a box, her hands were not early. She ran the sequence, all of it. Not a demonstration and not a performance. She ran it the way it is run at a graveside, at the tempo it is run at. And the only sound on that hillside was the small, hard knock of a palm on a stock at the ends of the count, 4 times, exactly evenly spaced, like somebody setting stones into a wall. 9 mourners stood up. An old man in the 2nd row got up first, on a stick, with somebody's hand under his elbow, and after that it went along the rows the way it does. Nobody asked them to. Nobody in that shelter had any authority to ask them to. 9 people who had come to bury a 91-year-old man got out of folding chairs on a hot Friday morning because something had just happened in front of them that they had no words for at all. Bram O'Yelleran, at the right-hand end of the firing party, understood it in about 4 seconds and did not move a single muscle in his face. No formation was called. Nobody saluted. Nobody said a call sign, and nobody said a rank, and nobody said her name, then or afterward. And that is exactly how she wanted it. and she had spent 3 days making sure of it. She brought the rifle down and turned it, and handed it back to Corbin Ludd butt first. He took it with both hands. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice did not work properly, and he tried again. "How did you do that?" Nobody was arrested. There was no court-martial, no inspector general, no investigation of any kind, and nobody so much as raised a voice in an office. What came apart that afternoon was not a person. It was a program, and it came apart in about 40 minutes on a folding table. Vreeland's 4 pages went in front of Lucienne Fabre at 1400 because Cordelia Brody telephoned the annex and asked for the master sergeant by name, and after that a visitor pass was not a difficulty anybody wanted to have. Fabre put her own folder next to it. Between the two of them, on that table, the whole thing was legible for the first time since 2023. No permanent cadre, 90-day volunteer rotations with no overlap, so that every member left about the time they became useful. No continuity trainer since Brody's health ended it, 3 years earlier. No copy of the ceremonial standard held anywhere in the building. 0 recorded practice repetitions in 9 weeks, and 3 of the last 11 services with discrepancies that had never been written down, because there was no form on which to write one. Emmerich Vale was not punished. This account is going to be deliberate about that, because it is the whole point of it. He was sent to the 8-day course at the schoolhouse, which is precisely what he had requested in writing in February, and had been told there was no funding for. Fabre found the funding in about 90 minutes, once there was a folder on a table with the number 3 in it. He came and found Vreeland in the car park that evening. "I should have taken your hand on Tuesday," he said. "You should have been given a trainer in 2023, she said. "That is a different sentence, and it is not yours to say." Corbin Ludd ran the movement 211 times over 11 days, with Bram O'Yelleran counting out loud beside him in an empty annex after duty hours. On the 12th day, he didn't drop it. O'Yelleran has said since that the boy was never the problem, that his hands were good on day 1, and his count was good, and that what he had actually been missing was 11 days of somebody standing next to him saying the number out loud, which is a thing you cannot buy and cannot fake, and which nobody had had time to give him. That is the whole of what happened to Corbin Ludd, and it is enough. And anybody who has ever been the worst person on a team knows exactly how much it is. There is a thing worth taking out of all this, and it is not about rifles. When something fails in front of you, the person holding it is almost never the reason. He is the last link in a chain that somebody stopped maintaining years ago, and it is very satisfying and completely useless to go after the link. Go and find out what stopped in 2023. If somebody in your building is failing in public, the interesting question is what they were handed and by whom. Subscribe to Honor Tales. She wrote the standard that night. 2 pages. Not a manual, because a manual would never be read. 2 pages. What gets run? How often? By whom? What gets written down? And who has to sign that it was? She put it in Fabre's hands at 2200 and drove to the airport. And she was in the air before the first service on Saturday morning, and there was no goodbye and no ceremony, and nobody watched her go. Fabre asked her, at the door, what she wanted her name on it to say. "Nothing," Vreeland said. "Put whatever the program needs to make it legitimate, and put it small." The garment bag came home unopened. 3 weeks later, on a Friday in July, there is a drill hall on that installation with a concrete floor and nothing soft in it anywhere. Bram O'Yelleran is the program's first continuity trainer. It is a real appointment now, with hours in it. There are 7 people on the detail, and there have been 7 on every service for a month. Corbin Ludd is on the rifle. O'Yelleran watches the movement come through and finish, and does not say anything for a moment, and then says the word he says about 40 times an evening. Again. And on the wall by the rifle racks, laminated, is a 2-page document that everybody in that building has read and nobody has ever thought about, because that is what a standard is for. There is no plaque on it. There is a name at the bottom of the 2nd page in 6-point type, and in 11 months, nobody has ever read it. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.